welcome back to another episode of the Biblical Preaching Podcast. My name is Mike. I'm here with Peter, as always.
Hello.
Hello, good to see you. We wanted to think together and chat with you a little bit today is thinking about preparing a message, and really, I guess we're trying to think of the simplest way to think through how to prepare a message that you're going to preach.
Yeah.
And the simplest way that kind of you've come up with and has been really helpful to me over many years in terms of how I think about kind of preaching process and preparing, like I said, is to think of 4 locations, kind of having in your mind, which is essentially the process of kind of going from a Bible text to a preaching or declaration kind of message, in these 4 steps, four locations.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to have it as simple as possible.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we can get bogged down in complexity. And you can get complex, you can get infinitely complex, but having the simple overview just helps. Yeah.
So we can go through each location one at a time, and so you'll need to have some imagination about all the kind of, these places aren't necessarily literal places. You can do all of these, you can visit all of these places in your chair.
Well, 3 of them.
Okay. Well, there you go. We'll see if you can work out which one you don't have to be in a chair to do. So let's start with the first one.
Yeah.
And so I'll kind of set the scene a bit, and then you can kind of explain how we go from Bible text to preaching. The first location is the study. It might be obvious, but starting in the study.
It's an important one, though. I think the study is not the office. That's one thought straight away.
Yeah.
You know, and I think in the old days, pastors would have studies, and then it kind of became the pastor's office. And that's sort of, mine are combined. We're sat in it right now. But, you know, an office has beeping things and screens and phones and distractions and interruptions, whereas a study kind of implies what it says on the tin. It's a place where you can focus, a place where you can be in the Word. It's you and God, your Bible, commentaries, and probably realistically an internet connection these days, but it's not hyper connected, being interrupted, being distracted and trying to get something achieved while doing a to-do list. It's a place where you focus in on the text and you make it your goal to understand, what does this text mean? What did the original author intend to communicate to his original recipients back in the day? And I'm there with God saying, Lord, help me to understand this.
There are a number of steps in this location. We don't sort of go through all of the steps of each thing, but you're essentially you and God with the Bible text, with his inspired Bible text, however you want to do that. So I tend to print mine out on a piece of A4 with kind of wide margins and lines, and have pens and pencils and colours and things. And that's sort of my, again, whether I'm in a literal study or just on a table. Yeah, like you say, it's you and God and his word, and you're studying, but you're just, again, trying to kind of come up or investigate what God is saying in that text.
Yeah, exactly. It's not complicated by what am I going to say on Sunday. That's not, I mean, it will come into your mind inevitably, and I always think it's a good idea to have a piece of paper, and when something comes to mind about the message, write it down and push it to one side, because this is the time to be making sense of the text, and for the text to be getting a grip on me. It's not just a sort of head exercise, it's a spiritual exercise of being in the Word and talking to God about it and trying to understand it and letting it shape and change me. And that's why I kind of emphasize this idea of not being interrupted, not having, this isn't something you do in 5-minute chunks. This is something that takes some focus and some almost quiet, sort of a quiet place where you've got the Word open and there's space and time for your mind to ponder, for your heart to churn, for you to think, oh, hang on a minute, what about this? And to pull out a commentary and look at it, or when you're reading a commentary to then take another reference tool. But it's all on this quest to say, arrive at a place where you can say, okay, this is the main idea of this passage. And so, yeah, like you say, Mike, there's loads of steps that you can get into, but essentially in the study, you go from the passage that you're preaching to the point where you can say, okay, now I'm confident, humbly confident, not arrogant, but humbly confident. I get it. I get the flow of thought. I get the meaning. I get why it was written. And I can summarize that in a single sentence so that I can carry it with me into the rest of the process.
One thing that I really appreciated, kind of with what you're saying as well, is just the idea that it's almost irrelevant that you're preparing to preach a message at this point.
Right.
Obviously, the reason you're kind of sat down is because Sunday's coming, but it's almost a sense of it doesn't matter that Sunday's coming. This is, and it's not just the prayer of Lord, give me a message for Sunday. Okay, Lord, give me a message for me now in these days that I'm kind of with your word. Speak to me, grip me, and kind of the message stuff for Sunday will kind of come later.
Yeah. But
actually, this is where God is giving you a message for you, for your heart. And I think that's really, really important. It's so quick. It's so easy to try and be quick and sort of jump straight to what do I say on, in a few days' time or next week or a few weeks' time.
Yeah.
If you've got a few weeks. And just having that time kind of with you and the Lord should be really precious.
Absolutely. Yeah. It takes me back to Haddon Robinson's definition of preaching, which I really should look up rather than going from memory. But there's two elements in his definition that often don't get into other people's definitions. So he talks about biblical preaching being the communication of a biblical concept, and then he describes the process of the hermeneutical Bible study process, derived from and transmitted through a literal, grammatical, historical understanding of the passage in its context, something like that. But he's actually putting in description of the study process.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's one part. But then he says, which the Holy Spirit first applies to the preacher and then through the preacher applies to the listeners.
That's great.
And so it's that sense of, okay, I want to get my hermeneutics right. I want to understand this passage. I want to use whatever skill and resource I have. And then I'm not just rushing out to preach a message. I'm doing that with the Spirit working in me. So I'm having an encounter with God. It's affecting me. He's affecting me. I'm meeting with him so that subsequently, when we think about a message for others, we're not coming as carriers of information. We're coming as people that have been touched by God in this text for this occasion.
I think one of the dangers for me is that I will tend to have an experience with someone who's written a commentary about the passage I'm preaching on, rather than an experience with God who's written the passage. I mean, like that. So I go too quick to commentaries and almost have that sort of conversation experience with a commentary writer before I'm having one with the Lord. Maybe in another episode we can talk about kind of using commentaries in preaching and preaching process.
One reason the study is so critical, or one way to underline it, is to say that it's because of the study that we can't simply go online and find a sermon outline or go on AI and generate a sermon in the style of so-and-so, because that's fast forwarding. Even if AI could generate an absolutely perfect outline to a text in the style of your favorite preacher or whatever, it doesn't matter. Even if it develops to that, or maybe it's there already, I don't know. But even if it does, it doesn't matter, because the study is my privilege.
Yeah.
The study is where God is going to work in me. And it's not, the hours that I'm in that room. It tends to be the days around those hours as I'm reading the text, wrestling with it, trying to understand it. Then life is wrestling with me, and God's, bringing challenges at home and in all the practicalities of life. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is exactly what I need to be preaching on Sunday. Wow, he's really pushing me on this. And so it's that whole phase of personal study that is not concerned with the message. It's concerned with the God of the message.
Yeah.
And that's why I think there is no shortcut. And not only there is no shortcut, I don't want there to be a shortcut, because it's that agony that someone's called, the preaching process, the agony of preaching. Partly it's that agony in the study of wrestling with the text. I don't quite get it. Why is it there? Why does that verse come after that one? Those kind of struggles. That's the privilege. That's the joy. And so putting in the time in the study will subsequently yield fruit in the rest of the process. And there is no shortcut around it.
The primary relationship that we're thinking in this location in the study is that relationship between me as the preacher and God as God, and that's kind of what we're focusing on, and that very much obviously has connection with the next location, the second location. You tend to call the prayer place, and obviously prayer should be involved in the whole thing, but there's a particular point. This second location is very specifically put here, so once you have done the study and you said you've wrestled with the text has wrestled with you, and you have the big idea of the text. What is it about? What is it saying? And then you go to the prayer place. Like, why have you sort of particularly explicitly put prayer at that point?
Yeah, I think it was Kent Edwards' book, Deep Preaching, that I first read this idea, and it just resonated with me. He was talking about how he had trained hundreds of preachers, students in preaching classes. Some were excellent, some were not. But it didn't matter, in a sense. Even the most excellent, what was missing in almost every case was depth. And he was trying to figure out where's the spiritual depth coming from in preaching, because these young students, even when they do their exegesis right, still don't seem to have depth. And I think one part of that is life and experience, but the part that he zeroed in on was there needs to be a real deliberate time of prayer. So yeah, like you say, we pray all the way through the study process and everything else that we're doing. But this prayer place, prayer closet, stop and pray, whatever you want to call it, I think this is a time where you say, okay, I've had a wonderful time in my study, and I'm bringing with me the fruit of that, which in simplistic terms is the main idea. So in one hand, I've got the main idea, and in the other hand, I'm introducing into this whole process my listeners. Okay, so for the first time, I'm thinking, right, on Sunday or whenever the date is, I'm preaching to these people this passage. And in effect, what we're doing is bringing our hands together in prayer and saying, Lord, how do these two things come together? I've been so blessed, hopefully, in your word, but the clock is ticking, and I'm going to be preaching to them this passage. Give me your heart for them from this passage. Like, what do you want this sermon to be? What do you want it to achieve? And that's what happens in this prayer closet or prayer place. It's taking a deliberate, separate from the commentaries, separate from anything else, just me and God. Okay, Lord, I need your heart. I need to know what you, or even I want you to know that I need you as I prepare this message. I think in an ideal world, and this is not the world I'm in yet, but in an ideal world, if our church had a building, which we would love to happen, I would go from the room where I'm studying, my study, let's call it, and I would go out to the room where I was going to preach.
Yeah.
Because this is the point where I'm starting to think about preaching to these people. And if it's my own church, I know where people tend to sit. I can be praying for specific people and really praying that God would bless this particular sermon in a special way. So, it's not these two places, these two locations are a totally different amount of time, typically. I mean, you could take 10, 20 hours in the study. You could take 10, 20 hours in prayer, but I suspect most don't. But even if you've taken a good chunk of time in the study, the temptation is to say, okay, Lord, I need to prepare the message, amen, and not actually really pray. And so taking a definitive amount of time or a deliberate amount of time just to really come before God, I think that's the bare minimum. And then ideally, I would say stay there until you have just that sense of, right, I've prayed. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not, I've said the words or the clock has ticked, but my heart just has that sense that I've really poured it out to God, and it's been a special time, but it's now time for me to move on.
Yeah. And so we're moving on with that, with the prayers that we've prayed and with the notes that we've made, and we're moving with those things to the third location, which we tend to call a coffee shop or something like that.
Yes. I call it Starbucks, but I don't.
Starbucks, yeah.
But I feel bad about
Other
that.
coffee shops are available. I don't know if we need to do we need to
I don't know. The irony of it is I don't like coffee and I never go in Starbucks, but it also kind of begins the same as study.
Study,
You know,
yeah.
study, stop and pray, Starbucks. So I go with that. But yeah, I offend coffee drinkers by using the word Starbucks, and then I offend coffee drinkers by saying I don't drink coffee. And so either way, I'm going to lose. I think the important thing about it is that there's a very dynamic difference between a study and a Starbucks. Right? If I'm in a study, I'm reading commentaries, I'm using vocabulary in my own thinking that I don't use in real life. You know, and I'm looking at historical stuff and linguistic stuff. When I'm in a coffee shop, I'm surrounded by normal people, living normal life, using normal vocabulary, and they're the people I want to communicate with.
One of our friends in Swindon, I know, well, presumably maybe still does, but certainly used to literally go to a Starbucks kind of to do this and kind of process, because, like you say, he's there with people, and as he has God's message to him in his heart, and he kind of obviously still has his notes and the text, and he's seeing single mums in the coffee shop around him, and he's seeing, you know, friends together and work colleagues together, and it's just that prompt, isn't it, of, okay, when I preach, I'm preaching to real people in real life situations. How, like, what is this message going to do to them, to those specific people, either slightly generic people in a coffee shop, but then it's the triggering of, okay, how can this message land for this person that sits there, and that person that sits at the back on the right? What is God's message for, you know, for them? You're connecting your message with the real people in the real world and in your real church.
There's a danger, I think, when you're in the study, or when I'm in the study, I'm fascinated often. You know, I'm loving what I'm reading, and whether it's some insight in the original language, whether it's, you know, some commentary background, cultural background, whether it's, you know, some theological bunny trail that I've enjoyed, I'm fascinated. And at that moment, I would probably think everyone else would love this because I'm just immersed in this bubble. But the reality is most people aren't thrilled by a purely historic lecture or by a very technical presentation of something. And so when I come to write out my message and to plan my message and to kind of formulate the wording of the points and the introduction and all the details of it, it just feels weird if I'm sat in a coffee shop to be writing some historic thing about the apostles' concern for such and such, because I look around and nobody would care. Yeah. Whereas if I put it in contemporary language for us today, there's an excitement to that because I'm bringing the two together. You know, I can sit in my office and think, wow, this is an incredible insight into the formation of the early church in Thessalonica or whatever. But normal people don't care. And so what is it I'm preaching? It's not a historic lecture. It's something contemporary, something for today, something that is going to land in their lives. And somehow being, even if it's just a mental location, even if I'm just conscious in my own mind, okay, stop thinking about the books, start thinking about the people. I've got to make sure that I'm forming a message that communicates with normal people, the people that I'm speaking to, not a whole bunch of commentary geeks.
That's also why having a one sentence big idea, the passage big idea, is so crucial, so helpful for this, because you just keep coming back to, that's what I'm communicating one thing,
yeah,
a one sentence idea, and you started with all the detail of the Bible text and sort of funneling it into this one sentence big idea, and it's that big idea then that's going to sort of reverse funnel, I guess, kind of back into the detail of the message, and you're thinking, well, into structure and, like I say, language you're using, but everything's coming back to, I want to communicate this big idea because that's the passage, that's what the passage is about, that's what it's doing, and you're just thinking, how can I communicate that to the real people? And that's essentially what we're trying to do in this Starbucks.
Yeah, and so you stay there. This is very hypothetical for me, like I said, but you stay in that place until you've got a message you can preach. And so for me, that's not just having an outline written, it's having preached it through, because sometimes things will make sense on paper, but when I try to say it out loud, it won't come out my mouth.
Yeah.
And so I want to have preached it through, had a sense that yes, that's what I want to preach. Maybe 2, 3, 4 times preach it through, and then once that's done and I'm happy, okay, third location done.
Yep.
So we've gone study. What did you call it? The prayer place, the coffee shop, Starbucks, and then there's one more part of the whole process, and that is
well, this is the one that you don't have to be in the same chair.
Unless you're in a pandemic and you're doing
And you have
everything
to do
on
it
Zoom.
online in the chair. That's true.
Yeah.
So there's exceptions to everything. But so the fourth one, you can call the pulpit, or if you want to keep the alliteration, then you stand and deliver. So this is the actual place, the location where you are delivering the message.
And technically, you might say that's not part of the preparation; that's the delivery. And technically, I would agree. You know, the more work you put in the study and in the coffee shop, the less you're trying to figure it out as you go. However, if you've preached much, you know that sometimes things do adjust. You know, you've had the most compelling presentation ever on your own, but when you're saying it to people, you're getting kind of blank stares, and so then there will be some adjustment. There will be some tweaking as you go, and so really I put this as the fourth location to be able to talk about delivery and how important that is. But if we're thinking purely in terms of preparation, there is hopefully a very small element where that is still happening in this fourth location. You're still adjusting, speeding up, slowing down, bringing in something different, a different way of phrasing, whatever's necessary, because your goal is to communicate, not just to get out your message, but to get your message to land in the listeners. And so there will be an element of ongoing prep even as you're delivering.
We're not to preach our outline. We're not even to preach a script. We're preaching a message that God has given us, and how you do that through an outline or even through a script or not, it almost doesn't matter. But it doesn't
matter for this talk. We'll talk about it another time. Another episode. That'd be a great chat.
Yeah, definitely. So there we go. So four locations. Just thinking about the as simple as we can. The simplest way of thinking about preparing a message: study, the prayer place, or stopping and praying in the prayer place. And third location, going to a coffee shop. Many coffee shops are available, and then the stand and deliver location, or the pulpit, where you're sort of delivering the message that you've had the joy of preparing.
Even just the simplicity of some of the logic of that. Just two thoughts. One is the study has to come before the coffee shop. Your goal is, your initial task is not to write down a sermon. Your initial task is to spend time in the text and get it. And so I think really understanding the investment in the study will yield fruit for the rest of the process. That's probably the most critical thing in that. And the other is the first three locations mean that the fourth one is not a place where you're preparing. If you haven't studied, you haven't really prepared properly in terms of prayer, you haven't planned a message, you just stand and start talking and hope God's going to come through, it's going to show.
Yeah.
And everyone else will wish that you'd spent time in the first three locations, even if you think it's some kind of miracle that's taking place. So that's very basic, but study before message preparation or formation, and all of the preparation before delivery. Simple, but I think important.
Yeah. So in each episode, we tend to have a biblical preaching for you. So where we'll sort of share something from the Bible that kind of relates to what we're talking about. So Peter, you've got something?
Very simple. So 1 Timothy 4, there's that famous verse where he talks about don't let anyone despise your youth. The verse after it, verse 13, Paul says, until I come, devote yourself to the public reading of Scripture, to exhortation, to teaching. And I love that because it's so easy to think, well, preaching's a bit dull. I've done it before. It doesn't ever quite live up to my prayers. It always sort of falls short, and, maybe people yawn or whatever. And it's easy to think, if only we could focus on something else. If only we could make it a bit more exciting, maybe a magic show, maybe some miracles, maybe something, else, that fireworks, maybe that's the key to, transforming lives, some gospel fireworks. But actually what Paul says there in a time where there was, if you like, more miraculous stuff in, certainly wrapped around an apostle, he's saying to Timothy, devote yourself to the public reading of the word, exhortation, teaching. That's what the church needs. And if that's what they needed then, I see nothing has changed. That's what we need now. And I love that encouragement, especially when it's, another evening, another time of sacrificing, doing the hard work in order to prepare a sermon. Devote yourself to that. It's worth it. It's worth it for them. It's worth it for you. It's what Paul told Timothy to do. And so, 1 Timothy 4:13. Let's devote ourselves to the preaching and reading and exhortation and teaching of the word.
Well, maybe the best next thing for us all to do after this episode is grab a Bible, particularly if you're preparing a message for a coming weekend. Grab the Bible, print out the passage that you're preaching, and just dive in. Get your nose sort of rubbed up against that, and the Lord will speak to you. We're grateful again so much for you joining us on another episode of this podcast, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate every positive review, like, share, and comment. And thank you for praying for us. We hope you will join us again next time on the Biblical Preaching Podcast.